All right, let's talk Rise of the 49ers. I watched the whole thing. You won't watch it, and I understand why. Is a I guess it was an interesting primer for people like me who didn't live through those years. But now that I've watched it as 4 episodes, there's some things they just completely left out. And maybe I'm nitpicking. I'd like to know what you think. They never mentioned Mike Holmgren's name in 4 episodes. They briefly mentioned George Seifert at the end when they talk about, you know, Walsh leaving and Seifert taking over. And a few years later, Steve Young wins a Super Bowl and they ride off in the sunset. That's pretty much all George Seifert gets. I'm not trying to take anything away from Bill Walsh, but it seems like Holmgren and Seifert were pretty important to the rise of the 49ers.
Crucial to the rise of the 49ers. Um, I'm not sure what the focus is. Let me explain why I haven't watched it. I lived those years, so in a way, I don't want to look back. Plus, I don't watch television very much. I've told you, I mostly read. I don't. Now, Ira Miller, who covered all those years for the Chronicle and was the best football writer in America, called me, said he watched it and he liked it. That not that he learned that much, but he said he learned some things, but that he enjoyed to go back down memory lane and hear from all the players we covered. So Ira liked it. He thought it was worthwhile. So I'm not saying it's not worthwhile. I just didn't watch it. But I do have issues. I have issues with whom they interviewed. Now, Iggy watched it, and I asked him, who did they interview? First of all, this was put together, I think, by Tom Brady. What the hell does he
There's
have
a lot
to
of
do?
Brady, man. A lot of Brady talking, which is hilarious.
I mean, he's from the Bay Area, but he was a Patriot. So
Yeah.
how did he stick his head in there, stick his nose
Yeah.
in there?
He calls him we the whole show.
It's bullshit. Now, here's
Yeah.
the other thing. I know coaches from that era.
Yeah.
Did they interview Holmgren? No. Did they interview George Seifert? No. Did they interview Fred Von Appen?
No.
No. Fred Von Appen won 2 Super Bowl rings with Bill Walsh. And when Bill Walsh came back to Stanford, Fred was his defensive coordinator. Fred knows more about Bill than anybody.
Yeah.
Did they interview Ray Rhodes? Ray Rhodes was involved in all that stuff.
Yeah.
So how the fuck do you have a thing about the rise of the 49ers and you don't interview those people? It's like, are you serious? And they didn't interview Ira Miller, who is the expert. And they didn't interview me. I'm not offended that they didn't interview me. I'm puzzled. I'm just puzzled. I wrote a book on Bill Walsh. I knew Bill better than any journalist in America. I'm the one who broke the story that he was dying. He called me and he said, Lowell, would you break the story? I'm dying. And I did that. I knew him better than any journalist in America. And Tom Brady, my phone number is out there. He could have got it. So I guess without having seen it, it strikes me as half-assed.
Yes. What was interesting to me, again, as someone who didn't live through the 80s Niners, I didn't understand what a controversy and circus Bill Walsh turned the Steve Young, Joe Montana thing into. I didn't live through it, so I assumed they traded for Steve Young, but he wasn't quite ready, and Joe was the greatest of all time, and everyone knew that, so Steve had to wait his turn for 4 or 5 years, and eventually he got the job, and then he was great. But that's not really what happened. I mean, it seemed like they were splitting time, rotating during drives. There were games where Steve Young would start outright, and Bill Walsh brought a lot of the attention on himself. He would call it a quarterback controversy in press conferences. I mean, people wouldn't do that anymore. At the time, did you think it was strange, or did you think it's Bill, whatever he decides to do is probably the right thing to do?
Both. I thought it was very strange, but I also thought, usually I'm not this deferential. Who am I to question Bill? Bill was so far above everybody else. Sure. But as I got to know Bill, especially after he retired, Iggy, he was not the most decisive person.
Right.
He had a lot of, I've told you people before, he had a lot of insecurities, a lot. And he was always, every day, he woke up with something that was troubling him that he didn't feel good about. And I think in the case of the quarterbacks, he was wishy washy. He was wishy washy between the two of them. And I think one of the results of it, and it wasn't the quarterback's faults, they don't like each other.
Yeah.
And how could you? How could you like each other when the guy played you like two marionettes that were competing with each other? So I think a lot of it was Bill's personality. Uh, Look, I think Joe felt, what is this deal with Steve Young? I'm a better quarterback, and I'm here first. And that's a legitimate position.
Yeah.
From from Steve's point of view, he brought me in. He told me this other guy's on his last legs. How come I'm not playing? They both had a legitimate gripe, but I understand it. I understand why Joe has a beef, although I think Joe still has a beef all these years later about that and other things. And I think Joe's a nice man, and it's time to give some of that stuff up.
The way I read it, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe wasn't Bill's first choice. He wanted Phil Simms. They got Joe Montana when they missed out on Phil Simms. And of course, Joe Montana was this savant, great quarterback. But it felt like throughout his career, especially watching this show, that Bill didn't necessarily fully appreciate what he had in Joe Montana at the time, and maybe thought that Joe Montana was like the limit of his offense and was a bit of a system quarterback. And then if he could teach someone like Joe how to do it, that maybe imagine what he could do with John Elway or Steve Young, someone who was really, really gifted. And he was really eager to start Steve. But at the same time, he didn't have the guts to make the switch. And what I think was interesting about Seifert, when he became the head coach, he ended the quarterback controversy, stuck with Joe. And then when Joe finally got hurt a couple years later, he made the full switch to Steve. He was much more decisive.
Yes, George was very definitive in the way he thought. Bill was not. And Bill would drive people crazy. He would drive people in the locker room crazy because they didn't know who the quarterback was. That's how Bill was. George was not like that. I've told you that he always flirted with the idea of trading Joe.
Yep.
A long time, almost from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the kind of guy who would bring it up in coaches' meetings. Now, I know because coaches told me this, and I've said it here. One time he said, I'm thinking of trading Joe and starting Steve. Everybody who agrees with me, raise your hand. I mean, Holmgren is in there, and Van Appen and Bob McKittrick. No one raised a hand. Nothing against Steve. Steve's a great quarterback and a great guy. But no one wanted that. And so Bill then could tell himself, oh, I'm not going to trade Joe because it's not me, it's the other guys don't want it.
Yeah.
That's how he was. The other guys don't want it. And then I've again told you, he and Al Davis were close. I don't think Bill liked Davis. I don't know what Davis felt. But they had come up together. They were close. And Bill was always trying to trade Joe. So he Al said, all right, send over some tape of Joe. And he sends it in, and Al watches it with Tom Walsh. And these are Raiders guys, and these were good Raiders guys when the Raiders were good. And they look at Joe playing this, this mini ball, right? Throwing short passes and great timing and all of that. And Al said, I don't want them. Our receivers are built for speed. We want the one big play. Joe can't do that. My guys, quote, will outrun his arm, but we'll take Steve. Steve. And Bill said, no way. No. So that's the background.
That's a great story. And then the other story I love from you is later on in his life when Bill was deep into retirement, he would go back and watch film of Joe Montana and seem to appreciate what he didn't necessarily appreciate in the moment.
Yeah. what happened was he was speaking somewhere at a quarterback's clinic or something like that. And he used to, Bill was alone. It's funny that someone so famous could be lonely. Bill was a lonely guy and he needed boosting all the time. He used to call me all the time. And I was happy that he did. So he called me and he said, Lowell, I have to talk at this clinic and they're going to show some film of Joe. And he said, I'm looking at his work. He said, Lowell, every pass was exactly where it needed to be. And he said it, Iggy,
Mhm.
with love, that he was perfect, that I'm looking at perfection and I'm falling in love again. That's how he talked about it. Now, did he ever tell Joe that? From what I know, and I knew Bill pretty well and liked him, Bill never praised anybody. I believe, I'm not a Freudian, I believe that he, Bill had a very difficult relationship with his dad. And I believe that his dad never praised him, made him feel like shit. And as a result, Bill didn't learn how to praise. He didn't learn how to praise. So
Or he
Steve,
learned how not to praise.
or he learned how not to praise. So
His son
Steve,
actually addresses that in the show. It's one of the best little moments of the show.
what
Craig
does he
says,
say?
he said, "It was so hard to get praise from my dad, and I think he did it on purpose because you keep striving and striving and striving to get his praise, and you never quite get it, but now he's sort of like coaching you, and he's sort of getting you to, I don't know if he said be your best version, but at least he gets you to work hard to achieve something you won't attain."
That's a father?
That's what he said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what's interesting about that? He didn't praise, and Steve told me he didn't praise.
Yeah.
Um, what's interesting about that is Bill needed praise all the time.
Yeah. That's so funny.
One time he called me. It was so touching because Lowell said, you say, Lowell, it's Bill Walsh. Like it's, on the phone, it says Bill Walsh. So he said, I'm co-teaching a class at the Stanford Business School. And I'm not doing well. I'm not doing well, Lowell. I said, what are you talking about, Bill? He says, my voice, I'm an older man now. My voice doesn't project. My voice is really not that good. And I said, Bill, your voice is good enough. Your
Great
you
voice.
you have a great voice. Don't worry. And here's the thing, Bill, you're Bill Walsh. People are not going for your voice.
Yeah.
They're there to be with you, and I'm sure they're making it their business to hear you. Do you really think so, Lowell? Do you really think so? Don't worry about it, Bill. You're doing great. Thanks, Lowell. That really helped me. I was happy to do it, Iggy. I didn't resent it at all, but he needed praise and he needed
Yeah.
support, which he wouldn't give to other people. Isn't that interesting?
It comes through in this show too, and he wasn't a part of it, but it just feels like he set the narrative for the 49ers in that era, and it lives on today. And he, like you said, he needed all the praise. It still comes through like he needs 100% of the praise. So why wasn't Mike Holmgren in the show? Why wasn't George Seifert in the show? Because the narrative from that era is that it was all Bill. He didn't need anyone else. And when he finally left, George Seifert had the best team of all time. And who wouldn't win a Super Bowl with that? Which is why George isn't in the Hall of Fame and it annoys me.
Well, George won 2 Super Bowls. He won a second one without Montana and without
Both were
any
blowouts.
blowouts. George should be in the Hall of Fame. And again, if the focus was just on the beginning of the 49ers, well, George was the defensive coordinator for part of it, not for all of it. But Iggy, he was really important. He was really important. And for the 49ers, he was a great head coach. Not good, a great head coach. And Carmen, who is a dear friend of mine, Carmen and Eddie, made a terrible mistake when they got rid of him and brought in Mariucci. Mariucci compared, I like Steve, he's a nice man. But compared to George as a head coach, he was a lightweight.
And that's putting it mildly.
Okay.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So,
I guess
but anyway,
yeah, it, it felt like you got to see the truth of that era a little bit, but they didn't present the truth. It was very much the same narratives, like it was all Bill, and but then they showed footage of Bill sort of bungling the quarterback position in '87 and '88. It's like, wow, I had no idea. He was indecisive. He couldn't pull the trigger when he wanted to. He couldn't do the thing he wanted to do. And then when they pushed him out, it was the right thing to do. That's my takeaway from watching the show. I never understood how you could possibly push out Bill Walsh after 3 Super Bowl victories and he just won his third one. I totally get it. And I think they were better off as a team without him. They kept the whole team the same and just let him go and then won the Super Bowl the next year and won 14 games.
Iggy, why do you think? By the way, I agree with you, but why do you think it was the right thing to push Bill out?
Because he was screwing with the team with the quarterback thing. It's why they were 6-5 in 1988 before they went on that run. It seemed like he was getting in the way, and they needed. It also, again, he needed all the credit. It's not Joe. It's not even Steve. It's not Seifert. It's not Holmgren. It's me. And I think him leaving allowed everyone else to shine. It's Roger. It's Jerry. It's Joe. It's Holmgren. It's Seifert. It's not just Bill.
I think again that there was some conflict between Joe and Bill about who really was running the offense because Joe learned it as well as Bill. He understood it as Joe. You used the word savant. He was in football, and I think he knew it as well as Bill. And I've told this story before. He would sometimes he'd go into the huddle, and Bill would have called a play, and he would say to the Keith Fonhorst, who's died, told me this. Joe would come in and say, "You're not going to believe this shit." That meaning the call that Bill made. And I told Bill later on that, and he actually laughed. He said, "I can imagine." He said it a lot of times.
It's funny. I would imagine that Joe has a huge ego and that Steve has a huge ego. Joe doesn't really seem like the kind of guy who likes to call a ton of attention to himself. He doesn't seem like he has a ton to say, but he does have a lot of confidence. Like he's sitting there being like, I knew I was better than Steve. He keeps saying, I knew I was better. And
Yeah.
that's pretty powerful. Whereas Steve is sitting there being like, when was it going to be my turn? And he comes across a little bit like a diva, like, man, relax. You're the backup to the greatest quarterback of all time. Relax. It's okay.
In fairness to Steve, many years went by, and it's hard. I wouldn't relax. I'd have
True.
a problem with that. But
That's true.
again, it's not anything about Steve and Joe. It's Bill fucked them over.
Yeah.
He set up an impossible situation, and that's
Yeah.
not to his credit.
Yeah,
Unless
and
you
it didn't
say,
make the team better. Bringing in Steve Young obviously made the team better and led to a 5th championship, but the way he was juggling them wasn't really fair to them or the locker room.
and Iggy, did the locker room notice what Bill was doing and wonder about it?
Absolutely. Apparently in 1988 when they were 6-5, they had some players only meeting and basically said, "Forget Bill. Let's do it for us and let's do what we need. We know what needs to be done." I mean, this was led by like Ronnie Lott, and then they went on a run. So I think they were starting to lose confidence in his decision making.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Yeah.
And when he would say like, after 10 years, it seems like teams sort of or coaches lose their effectiveness and their voice sort of gets tuned out.
He said tuned
Maybe
out.
he maybe he's speaking from experience.
He felt, now again, he was pushed out, but he told everybody that 10 years was enough, a decade, which again brings you back to Kyle. This is going to be his decade year. Does he get an 11th? Bill won 3 Super Bowls. This guy would get an 11th with, he's not going to win a Super Bowl next season, Iggy. He's not.
No.
Forget it.
He's in year 10 and he's got 2 quarterbacks. And what's he going to do?
Yeah.
Is he going to trade Mac Jones? Is he going to, if Brock Purdy gets hurt again next year and Mac Jones plays well, is he going to stick with Mac Jones? Like, what's he going to do? This is a huge year for Kyle Shanahan. He's going to Riyadh. Have they tuned you out? Do you have a running game? What do you got?
Iggy, another question about this series on the Niners. When you watch it, do you come away liking Bill Walsh?
No.
Tell me.
No. You come away appreciating Bill Walsh, but liking him, I mean, he doesn't necessarily come across as a likable figure. A hard worker, a guy who was pretty brutal towards his players, but got the best out of them. And no, I don't know about like. I don't know about like. You come away liking Joe Montana, Randy Cross, Rathman, the players, Ronnie. But Bill, maybe it's because he's not there to speak on his own behalf, and you just have footage of him, and you have his former players talking about him, and Joe and Jerry aren't necessarily the most complimentary of Bill. They had some weird things to say at the end of the show, so I don't know. Maybe different if Bill was able to be there for it.
Okay. He did some very nice things. Von Appen uh, became an assistant coach with the Packers. Bart Starr was the head coach who had been their great quarterback. And during a game, and I'm not sure if it was a regular game or a preseason, one of the players um, got a hot dog while the game was going on. And Fred was very angry about that. It's not how we did it at the 49ers. And Bart Starr would not discipline this player the way Fred thought he should for team decorum and the way Bill would have. So Fred quit and he didn't have a job. He was living in the Midwest and he didn't have a job. And Bill made up a job for Fred Van Appen to scout in some remote area in the upper Midwest.
Saskatchewan?
Saskatchewan. And he did it because he felt loyal to his coaches. He felt loyal to his guys. So although Bill could be brutal and apparently unfeeling, he was loyal. And Fred always remembers that.
See, this is why they should have interviewed you and Fred and other people, because there's no insight really into Bill Walsh in the show. You have Joe talking about him, but Joe's kind of shallow. And Jerry talking about him, but Jerry's kind of shallow. And Steve talking about him, and Steve's kind of deep, but they really could have benefited from you. I'm just saying. Or I would think Holmgren could have insights into what he's like.
Holmgren is a very perceptive, very intelligent, and very verbal. And what about Ira Miller? What about Ira? What about George Seifert? You think Seifert knew Bill pretty well?
I think so.
I would think so. Yeah.